my name is Kadine Christie. I'm a writer. I'm married to my childhood sweetheart, and I have 3 amazing children. Today, the piece I'll be reading to you is entitled Color. The first time I saw a white man in the flesh, I was 7 years old. My cousins and I were playing bat and run in the front yard when we saw the man hunched over and weighed down with some sort of contraption on his back. He had paused at the fork in the road just below us. There were 2 paths in front of him, the red dirt road to his right that would lead him to Moss Verdi's house, and the rocky road that would lead him to our home atop the hill. He chose the rocky road, and as he mounted the hill, all 7 of us, my siblings and cousins and me, searched each other's eyes, then ran like fire to the direction of the outside kitchen where Mama was cooking dinner. The man might have chosen our house because of the scent of stewed chicken, the marriage of onions, scallions, thyme, tomatoes, and chicken simmering over pimento wood. Mama tilted the lid of the duchy to let some steam out. She listened to our tales so she could, as she would endearingly say, pick sense outta nonsense. That done, she walked ahead of us, wiping the stain of green bananas and yellow yam on the hem of her dress. We trailed behind her bravely, a tiny army of 7, following our fearless leader. Mama spoke to the man for a few minutes in the front yard, then invited him back into the kitchen. We followed behind them and sat on the makeshift bench, a long board held up by 2 cement blocks on either end. When the stew and its accompaniments were done cooking, Mama added an extra plate to the already long line of chipped dishes on our table, an old door stacked on top of crates. Ian, the white man, ate dinner with us that night. Due to scarcity, each member of our family had his or her own plate and cup. Ian ate dinner from his assigned plate and drank tea from his cup for the month he was with us. Uncle Dave, one of my mother's younger brothers, became Ian's party and companion, showing him all he needed to know and not know about becoming an honorary Jamaican. In the mornings, before the sun breathed in the dewdrops of the night, Uncle Dave showed Ian how to tuck his pant legs into his water boots. He would also make sure Ian was leaving with a thermos of Mama's sweet cornmeal porridge. After a long day in the field tending the yam mounds and sweet potatoes, Uncle Dave continued the task of teaching Ian. This time it was to fetch water in a bucket from the tank full of rainwater, find a corner, lather his rag with blue carbolic soap, and wash the sweat of the dirt from his skin. Uncle Dave also tried to show Ian how to play rata-rata on us children. However, Ian wasn't there long enough to learn how to steal flour dumplings from our plates. When Ian left, we stood atop our hill and mournfully watched as he descended, then mounted another hill leading up to Cumberland Church of God and faded out of sight. When I remember that time, I never once think about the color of our skins. Embedded in my psyche, however, is the dear memory of the warm camaraderie we all experienced in the month he was with us. When I was 10 years old, I migrated from Jamaica to the United States. Upon landing in LaGuardia Airport, I became a Black girl. I entered a new world, a slippery, twisted slope that began with my zip code, 07112. My parents lived in Newark, New Jersey, openly referred to as the Black Hood. It was one of the few places immigrants trying to start a life could afford a home. My parents had bought a shell of a home for $25,000. It had no plumbing and no electricity. Before we arrived, my parents managed to live in it for a year, while my father completely renovated it with his own hands. The disparities between where we lived and where my parents worked were extreme. There were invisible fences created by our zip code, the the 5-digit number that determined the city, the school, and ultimately the education, or lack thereof, my siblings and I would receive. This angered my parents because my father risked deportation to make a better life for us. My parents bought into the mantra that America's education would be our saving grace. My first entry into the educational system was a school severely lacking in resources. For 2 years, I learned nothing new, nor was I challenged, because I already knew the information being taught. What the US teachers were teaching in the 6th grade, I had already learned in the 4th grade in Jamaica. After elementary school, I had 2 options for high school. One was a performance-based school where acceptance was rooted in one's artistic abilities. I tried singing. I was not accepted. The other high school was famous for gangs, drugs, joyrides, and shootouts. My dad said, "Those 2 options are shits." My parents were determined to find a new option. This would require a change of zip code. My mother searched for a room to rent in Milburn, a white town that would allow me to change my zip code and attend Milburn High School. She located a room in the newspaper, phoned the landlady, and made an appointment to view the room. She was sure from their conversation the plan would be successful because the landlady, whose husband had died, was living alone and had said she would appreciate having company. My parents prepared me with the details. I would stay there for the week to attend school, and they would pick me up on weekends. My mother is a firm believer in 3 things: preparation, confirmation, and God. She called to confirm, and the landlady affirmed that she was, in fact, awaiting our arrival. After 40 minutes of driving, my mother pulled onto a street with neatly spaced houses on lush green grass. My mother smiled at me warmly as we got out of the car. She held my hand, and we walked up the stairs, admiring the flower pots on the covered porch. She rang the doorbell, and a gleeful white woman swung the door open. When she saw us standing there, her initial glow dimmed like an overloaded electric circuit. She retreated into herself like a turtle pulling its head under the protection of its hard shell. She asked if she could help us. My mother proceeded to tell her who we were. The landlady grew angry. Her words, "It's taken," pierced the air. She slammed the door shut in our faces. The wealth of choice was not ours. My mother's entire existence seemed to have frozen for a few moments, because it took a while before I can feel the warmth re-enter her hand still holding mine. She held my hand tighter as we walked to the car in silence. I ached for my mother that day, because while I heard her words of comfort and sensed the strength she was trying to convey, I sensed a stench of what I could not yet name, and a heaviness for which I had no words. I had not known the intensity of my mother's pain, nor did I know that a mother's heart could splinter into pieces when her child is physically bruised, emotionally hurt, or verbally injured. I would learn this agonizing heartbreak a few years after becoming a mother myself. No longer a little girl trailing behind Mama's bravery or holding my mother's hand, I grew into a wife and mother myself. My family moved into the village in Decatur, Georgia, so my husband could attend Columbia Theological Seminary. One of the great things about living in the village was the neighbors. We looked forward to each change of semester announcing new families. Sam, Sunny, and their 3 girls moved in 5 doors from us. Our friendship was instantaneous. Although Sunny spoke very little English and stayed indoors often, Sam was an extrovert who enjoyed people, new ideas, and ways of being. He loved that I homeschool, and together we made a pact. His 2 older girls would join our summer lessons from 9 to noon, and he would teach my children the Korean language on Thursday afternoons at 3. In the morning, the girls kicked off their shoes at our doorway, ran upstairs to our schoolroom, And once together with my children, their learning began. We took lunch breaks at noon. The children were like old sagacious friends. My sweet Korean neighbors and my brown babies seemed to have learned the secret of idyllic summer days and enriched life in general. They sucked honeysuckles, played and lived every minute with childlike wonder. When the children were together, they knew the magic and the crux of entertaining themselves. While the children played, I became a fly on the wall. I watched as they decided what to color in a new Walt Disney coloring book, where none of the images reflected my sweet baby browns or our new Korean friends. It was then my little fellow, 5 years old at the time, proposed they color a few characters brown. Livy responded to Marco, "Brown is a poopy color." Marco disagreed. "Brown is a pretty color." And off they went, each defending his or her point of view. When Sam returned, I explained to him the happenings of the afternoon and how I had pointed out to the children that brown is not poopy. He chortled awkwardly and suggested that his little girl did not know anything about color. Silence choked the space between us for the first time. I searched for strength, quelled the anger and pain in my stomach, and retreated behind the walls and safety of our apartment. This experience was becoming too heavy. It had just been a few weeks prior that during a play date, something else terrible happened. My friend Gretchen called to tell me she would have to walk the kids down and talk to me. I expected everything but what she had to share. While the kids, her 3 white boys, and my 3 melanated children had been playing, her oldest told my middle child he no longer wanted to play with her brown skin. We sat on a log outside my door as the words forced their way through Gretchen's lips. They painted a picture of my daughter's face being drained of its sparkle as those assaulting words pierced her ears and tore through the feelings in her tiny chest. As I listened, an aching rushed through me and uncontrollable tears fell onto my cheeks. Gretchen cried too. We looked at each other through red, swollen eyes. We hugged and cried, and she asked me sincerely, how do I raise more conscientious, sensitive white boys? It was a hard question, but it created a sacred space between us as we pondered it. That evening, as I washed the dirt from my children's hands and feet, then moisturized their cute faces with their sweet almond eyes looking up at me, I clothed them with words of affirmation, using the D'Angelo's song, "Brown Sugar Baby." The doorbell rang just after we had all found our way to the couch for me to read our nighttime story. Sam and Sunny were standing limply at our door, looking as though they had been through a storm. His face was lowered and her eyes were red with tears. Sam had obviously explained to Sunny what Livy had said about brown being a poopy color. Sunny entered our home, sat on our couch, made space for my children beside her. With limited English, she told each of them she was sorry. Gretchen's question and Sunny's apology gave me some hope to know that they would be working on their end to expand their family's perception of what brown means to us. When our color is marginalized or erased, our history and struggle becomes invisible. Thank you for listening. God bless.